Okay, today we're going to be looking at our array unit, Unit 5, and we're going to be discussing a little bit about what arrays are, why do we use them, how do we code them. Okay, and in our Moodle page, which I have up here right now, the information I'm going to be giving you over the week is all here in Moodle, and of course I'll be opening up more and more as we go along. It's a fairly large unit, but arrays are pretty important in programming. And to start off with the discussion of arrays, I should actually go back and talk a little bit about variables that we've learned in the course so far. We know what a variable is. We know that it actually represents a unit of storage or an area of memory, computer memory, where we can take some kind of value and store it. The variables work by data type, so we can have integers, strings, doubles, floats, booleans, whatever is needed. Okay, and the example that I have up here, you see that I've created an integer variable, or I use the example of an integer variable, and I've called it x, and I've set it to the value of 1. So the thing that's valuable about variables is that the data inside of the variables will change in the course of our program. Okay, but that's okay, because we don't even really care what's stored inside of a variable. The only thing we really need to know is, what is the name of the variable? What are we calling it? Okay, what's its indicator? In this case, the name is x, so in my program I could use x, and x will then symbolize or stand for whatever data I have stored in x at the time that it's being used in my program. And I can change this data at will or leave it the way it is. Okay, but I don't have to worry about what's actually inside of x. All I need to do is refer to it by the name x. Okay, the only thing about variables, the main difference between variables and arrays, is that a variable, the way we've been learning how to code them, can only handle one piece of data at a time. Okay, so whether I put the number 1 here or the number 1,000,000, it's only going to be one discrete number. Okay, I can't put more, I can't squeeze additional variables or a string of values inside of a variable like this, a normal variable. So, but let's say I have a situation where I have data that is actually intended to be grouped together. I might have a tax table. Like if you do your taxes, people's salaries fall into different tax brackets based on how much they earn. Okay, and you may need to have a table of values that kind of go up. Okay, and these values can be stored together. Okay, it really reduces a lot of work on the programmer, because if you can store all of these different pieces of data into one variable, that's a lot less coding and a lot less variable names to keep track of. Okay, so to overcome a problem of having to create separate different variables in which to store each piece of data, even though that data is related, we can use these things called arrays, which is a special variable, and it stores a fixed number of data values in sequence. Okay, the other thing it has in common with the variables we've learned about is an array has to have the same data type. So if you create an array as a type integer, the data, you can store multiple integers in that array variable, but they all have to be integers. You can't throw a double in there, you can't throw a string in there. So in an array, all of the values, and these type of arrays that we're looking at, all the values have to be the same data type. Okay, so if you take a look at this little diagram I have here on Moodle, this is like a little kind of a representation of how an array stores values and how we can get to those values. So in this array, let's just say it's an integer array. Okay, in other words, I'm storing a whole group of integers under one variable name. Okay, you'll see that the top part of this table, the top row, has values in them, actual values, different numbers. The second part is kind of an imaginary part. We don't really see this part, although we can manipulate it, called an index. This is the address of each piece of data inside my array. Now, the way I think of this is, you all know, like if you have an apartment building is just like one big building it's divided up into multiple apartments Okay, so I look at it that way. I look at the array in totality as a single apartment building. And I look at each individual value inside that array. You'll notice they'll have walls there, partitions between each value. I look at that as separate apartments inside that one big apartment building. Now, if you go to the apartment building, it's not going to help you too much just to walk in. You're going to need to know what apartment to go to. Okay, if you want to visit somebody there, hopefully you're going to know their address, their apartment number. Okay, and that's where the index comes in. You'll see that each value is assigned an index number. Now, this is done automatically. Okay, so depending on what the first value is that you put inside your array, it's going to automatically be assigned the lower index number. And then it's going to sequentially go up from there. So the one thing we just have to really know is, well, how big is our array? Well, how big do you want this array? Okay, and then the index will take care of the rest. We don't actually set the index values. Those are done automatically. An array always starts to count at 0. It always starts counting at 0. It's not like a loop where we can manipulate the numbers that we start at. An array will always start at 0. So there's no getting around that. That's just the way the language is coded. Most programming languages are coded that way. So you will see that we have our, actually we have a total of 11 different rooms here in this apartment building. 11 different, what we call occurrences or instances. Sometimes they're called buckets, the things where the values are stored. This could be a bucket, an instance, or an occurrence in an array. And then, of course, each occurrence or element, it also could be called elements, each of these things has its own address associated with it. So the number 12 here is the first position in our array, and it gets the address 0. And then we go sequentially up. We don't have to have these numbers in sequence. This could be any kind of data we want. We can sort arrays, we can put them in a sequence, but the values themselves, it's not required to have them in sequential order. But the index will be in sequential order. And of course we can put different values in these different buckets. You know, we can change it around. But the index is always going to stay the same. Now the highest number is going to, in this 11 element array, is 10. That's the highest address we can have for an array of this size, because we start to count at 0. Okay, but we actually think of it in these terms. The address is 0, but the element, the occurrence is, this is the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th occurrence. Okay, the final occurrence will always be, the index of the final occurrence will always be 1 less than the actual number in the actual number of occurrences or elements in the array. So in other words, 87 is actually the 11th element, but it has the address 10. Okay, because we start to count at 0. Okay, so the array index is just going to increase by 1 as we go up. Okay, and depending on what kind of data we want to extract from here, there are ways that we can put data in the array, and there are ways that we can point to a certain type of data in the array. So I'm going to go over to my Visual Studio program, and I've actually pre-programmed some stuff here. I've just kind of a before and after snapshot. What I've done up here is I've created a group of related variables. I'm going to imagine that they're related. Okay, they're all integer variables. I've created 5 of them, num1, num2, num3, num4, num5. I've given each of these a value, 5, 8, 16, 22, and 11. And what I want to do, starting on line 21, is to find out which variable has the value 16. Okay, now I obviously know, and we all know by looking at the code, that variable num3, the variable called num3, has the number 16 in it. But obviously the program isn't going to know that. We have to use checks like a conditional or a switch statement. So you can see that there's a lot of coding involved, relatively quite a bit of coding, because we have to go through each variable to find out. You know, we can't really assume that number 3 is going to have 16 in it all the time. We could switch it around. Maybe 16 is in none of these variables. So we need to put this programming in place. So you can see that I have a series of if, else, if statements going through all of the variables, num1, 2, 3, and so on. If I click start and run my program, you'll see that it should say found 16. Okay, no big deal. So obviously this third else if here, or the second else if, the third part of this if statement here, found 16 there. Okay, so cool, pretty simple stuff. If I change this value in any way, let's say I change the value and do a search, so 16 is no longer there, I'm not going to get anything. Nothing's going to show up. So that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to code all of these variables. There's a better way to do it. So I'm going to convert this all to an array. So I'm going to comment this out. Okay, not my console read line statement. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to take these 5 separate variables and change them into one single variable that we can partition into 5 different elements. And that's declaring our array. Now, to declare our array, we're going to need, just like we do in our other variables, how we started with our data type, we need to start by indicating what type of data we want to put in our array. And remember, the data type is going to have to be consistent. So if I declare this as an integer array, that's all I could put in it. That's the only kind of data you can actually put in it. Now, the weird thing that you're not familiar with is after my data type declaration, after I tell what data type it is, the keyword int, I'm going to use a set of square brackets. Those are the brackets just above your enter key on the keyboard. Just put that down a little bit. So I'm following my data type with square brackets, and now I'm going to use I'm going to actually come up with a name. So since I used num up there, I'm just going to use num here. I'm not going to follow it with a number though. After that, once I give my array a name, I'm going to then use an equal sign. Now, don't worry too much about this, but you're going to need to put in the keyword new. Now, new is what they call a constructor keyword. It builds the array under the covers, behind the scenes. But we do need it. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to repeat. We're going to use our repeat our data type. Again, put a set of square brackets there. And then this time, in the square brackets, I want to indicate how many pieces of data I'm going to store in this array. How many apartment rooms are going to be in my apartment building? How many apartments am I going to have? So originally we have 5. We have 5 different arrays up here. So I'm going to put 5 pieces of data in my array. Okay, so I could stop there. If I don't want to put any data in my array, I could just use my semicolon and stop it. Okay, but in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some data in here now. So what I want to do is I'm going to use a set of curly braces. Okay, and in between these curly braces, I'm going to put my data, separated by commas. Now, you can do this with a string array or a double array. It doesn't really matter. You can just separate them out with commas. So I'm following the convention up there. I'm just putting these all in. So what I'm doing is I'm populating my array. I'm declaring it, and I'm initializing it with data. So the commas tell the array, okay, it sort of divides it up into different apartment rooms. So 5 becomes my first occurrence, 8 becomes my second occurrence, 16 my third, 22 my fourth, and finally 11th is my fifth. So the question is, okay, I have this array. I put 5 pieces of data inside this one single array called num. Okay, how do I access any of this data? Well, let's take a look. I'm going to use a console write line statement. Okay, and I'm going to use the name of my array inside the parentheses. Now, this isn't really going to work. The problem is that if I try to run this program, it's not going to actually display the array. It's just going to tell me what kind of an object it is. So it's just telling me basically that it's a system int32 array. It's not really actually giving me the data, because the problem is it doesn't know. Even if this worked, it couldn't really display anything, because I'm not giving it enough information in order to display information that's in the array. The reason is, if I walk into the apartment building, remember, and I don't know what apartment number I want, I'm going to basically be standing in the lobby. Okay, I know I'm in an apartment building, but that's about all I could do. And the same with an array. If I give it the name, there really isn't much else I can do other than display what type of data structure this is. I need to use the addressing system.